I am Charles Sullivan, archivist of Mississippi Gulf Coast Community College. Since the summer of 2005, we at the MGCCC Archives, in addition to our regular duties, have been involved in preserving and captioning approximately 46,000 photographs in our C.C. Tex Hamill Down South magazine collection and our Dixie Press collection. These two holdings contain images from circa 1920 to 1980 and constitute the premier photographic reference of the Mississippi Gulf Coast for the middle 60 years of the 20th century. The destruction visited by Hurricanes Camille and Katrina can never be undone, but the Down South and Dixie Press photos preserve for posterity pictures of life before those catastrophes. So how did the MGCCC Archives acquire such a historical treasure? How did it happen? It began in summer 1996 while I was gathering photographs and information for Mississippi Gulf Coast Community College A History, 1911 to 2000. In the course of my research, I located a catalog of the college for the year 1928. I learned from College Board of Trustee minutes that the Dixie Press of Gulfport supplied the photos and printed the catalog. I needed copies of the original glossy photos used in the catalog in order to have publishable prints. I knew the Dixie Press was still in business, so on the spur of the moment, I called. Glenn Dillard, the owner, at Left, answered, and I asked him if by any chance the Dixie Press still had the glossy photos used in the Perkinston catalog of 1928. I thought he was either going to laugh or ask me if I'd taken leave of my senses. Instead, he replied, "We have thousands of old photos left behind by Clayton Rand, the previous owner, and those are likely among them, but you would have to find them." I asked, "May I look for them and use them in my book if I find them?" He said, "Sure." I went down to the Dixie Press print shop on 24th Avenue near the Gulfport City Hall as soon as I could, and found two 4-drawer file cabinets packed with photos in vintage cardboard and wood file boxes. Since the photos were mixed together, I quickly realized I would have to look at all of them in order to root out the ones I wanted. I told Dillard that I would supply the labor to put the whole collection in order if he would supply manila envelopes and hanging folders. He and his wife, Sherry, purchased the supplies and made available sufficient workspace. George Hydell, my student worker, and I spent 3 days putting the collection in at least a semblance of order. I found every one of the glossy photos used in the 1928 catalog and other Perkinston-related photos as well. I had those copied for my book. In 2002, after spending 20,000 hours across 6 years, I finished my 608-page, 320,900-word book on MGCCC. Though I often thought about that fine Dixie Press collection with all those photos of Beauvoir and Gulfport Field and Keister Field and dozens of other subjects, I did nothing about it for nearly a decade after George Hydell and I first put the photos in order. At the beginning of summer 2005, I began to think of the coast in general and the Dixie Press in particular. In retrospect, it could be argued that I had some sort of a premonition. If so, I was not aware of it. What I did have was a new computer and a new scanner and a whiz of a technician, Melissa Ladner, to run them. I also had 2 excellent summer student workers, Tracy Reed and Larkin Mason, both of whom were honest students and who had aced my world history course. With all this going for me, I called the Dixie Press, and Sherry Dillard answered. She remembered me. She informed me that her husband had died, but that the photos were, for the most part, as I had left them in the hanging folders. I asked if I could borrow some to scan for the MGCCC archives, and she agreed. In early June 2005, I went down and checked out all the photos related to Beauvoir and all related to military installations, particularly Keister Field, Gulfport Field, the CB base, and the Coast Guard. All the photos in the Dixie Press collection had belonged to Clayton Rand, a famous newspaper editor who claimed that he founded the first illustrated newspaper in Mississippi. The name of the paper in succession is Gulf Coast Guide, Mississippi Guide, and Dixie Guide. All the names had Guide in the title, but Dixie Guide is the name by which Rand's paper is usually known. Rand purchased the Dixie Press in 1925 and published the Dixie Guide from then until near the time of his death on February 26, 1971. At first a weekly, the paper became monthly beginning in 1942. Rand acquired the Dixie Press from H.E. Blakesley, who had founded it in 1919. Blakesley had published an illustrated magazine called Dixie, so the photos in the Dixie Press collection date from circa 1920 to 1971, with the earliest ones being those that Blakesley left behind. An estimate of Dixie Press photos is extremely difficult to arrive at because the photo sizes range from small to extra large. I finally decided on a conservative estimate of 3,300. Believe me, I now regard that as an extremely conservative estimate. Still, for a newspaper that published for 46 years, that number seemed small. It is. I later discovered that I was dealing with only a fragment of the total number of Dixie Guide photos. Clayton Rand's son, Clayton Rand Jr., donated 7 cubic feet of photos to the Mitchell Memorial Library at his dad's alma mater, Mississippi State University. Neither I nor Mitchell Memorial Librarian Mattie Abraham will hazard a guess at the number of photos in 7 cubic feet. Very few of these Dixie Press photos have any information written on the backs, but the best ones once did. The photos destined to be published had a typed caption called a tear sheet pasted on back. In preparation for publication, the typesetter tore off the tear sheet, set the type, and discarded the sheet. At the bottom of the backs of these 3 photos, one can see where the tear sheets were once pasted. Since the caption was printed in the newspaper, all one has to do is find the photo in the Dixie Guide microfilm, and voila, there is the caption. I certainly had a leg up on that, as I had purchased all known Dixie Guide microfilm as research material for my 608-page magnum opus on the MGCCC. There were, however, some problems unique to the Dixie Guide microfilm. Because almost none of the Dixie Press photos are dated, one has to search 46 years of microfilm looking for a needle in a haystack, and the haystack is incomplete. Whole years and portions of years are missing. If that were not enough, much of the guide microfilm is so dark that the photos cannot be seen, much less printed out. Searching fragments of newspaper for unidentified and undated photos on microfilm that is so dark that the pictures must be discerned by vague shapes is not recommended for light entertainment. Even so, my 2 summer student workers and I were able to identify a few of the best, which were then scanned by MGCCC archives technician Melissa Ladner. In early August 2005, I returned the military photos to Sherry Dillard and checked out her civilian photos and took them to Perkinston. While we were doing what we could with those, the phone rang. Cindy Hamill was calling. She said she had heard I was in charge of the MGCCC archives, and she wanted to know if I wanted to add her father's collection to our holdings. The Hamill name rang a bell, but I could not remember exactly why. Cindy, shown here with her father in front of their Biloxi home circa 1962, told me her dad Tex had published Down South magazine. When she said Tex Hamill, I remembered who he was. I said, yes, we would be honored to have them. Then I asked her how she knew me, and she said, I was a Perk student in 1971, and you were a history teacher. As it turned out, Cindy's 3 sisters and her brother had all attended 1 or 2 campuses of Mississippi Gulf Coast Junior College. Margot is pictured here from the 1960-61 Perkinston yearbook, and Tex sits with the other Hamill children in 1960 at a Biloxi snow cone stand. From left, the children are Joyce, Cindy, Penny, and John. Then I asked her to give me a ballpark figure of how many photos were in her father's collection. She said about 12,000. Oh, that took a moment to absorb. Later, we estimated the count of all images, photos, negatives, transparencies, and original illustration at more than 43,000. I told Cindy that I was busy with the Dixie Press collection and that I would come and get her father's photos in a couple of weeks. Then I hung up. Then I remembered all the things I had missed by not moving quickly enough, and I called her back and asked her, how soon can we do it? On Thursday, August 18, 2005, I drove the large college van to the Hamill compound located on a rise overlooking US 90, a mile east of Beauvoir and directly behind the long building with the Hook, Line, and Sinker restaurant in the front and Alberti's restaurant in the back. The Hamill's large two-story house faced east. 100 feet further up the rise, a two-room office structure rested atop concrete blocks. The south face of the office had an advertising sign saying Activities Incorporated, Down South Magazine, C.C. Hamill and Associates. At the north end of the office and making an L with it was a classic trailer home. That trailer had been purchased in 1950 by New Orleans-born, Texas-bred C.C. Hamill in order to return to the Southland after years in Chicago. He and his wife Marge, and their young children cruised the Gulf Rim with the trailer in search of a new home. They chose Biloxi as the place where they would settle. The office that became the headquarters of Down South Magazine was built beside the trailer, and their two-story house eventually stood south of that. In the picture, John, age 6 in 1956, third child and only son of Marge and Tex Hamill, poses beside the Down South office with a run of 20,000 magazines. The magazines are wrapped in paper and tied in bundles for delivery. Cindy, age 2 in 1956, assists her mother Marge in filing photos. Tex Hamill sits at his drafting table in his office and puts the finishing touches on the January-February 1956 Down South Magazine cover. While he and Marge did not start the Down South Magazine, they worked for it in its first year and acquired it soon thereafter. From 1950 to 1980, 177 bi-monthly issues of Down South were published. The Down South Magazine collection grew year by year. The 8x10 photos were placed in the 4-drawer metal file cabinet. Sets of negatives and small photos were stored in glassine sleeves in 10 2-drawer wooden cabinets. A 6-drawer wooden file cabinet held color transparencies. All of these are visible in this August 19, 1969 photo. The interior of the office still looked much the same on Thursday, August 18, 2005, when I arrived on site for the first time. I backed the van up to the steps of the office and Cindy opened the door. I loaded the large 4-drawer metal filing cabinet that held the 8x10 photos. Next, I began loading the small wooden 2-drawer filing cabinets. Cindy held back 5 of these cabinets, and also the 6-drawer wooden transparency file. She said her mother wanted to search those for family photos before sending them to PERC. She also said she would give me a set of original Down South magazines later. Those magazines were in a metal storage cabinet in the office. I pointed at the Gulf and said, Cindy, I wrote a book about 30 monsters that have come from there since 1717 to strike where we are now standing. And another one can come anytime. Camille struck 36 years and 1 day ago. I really think we ought to get all of this out of here now. She replied, if Camille could not flood this place, nothing can. I must admit that impressed me. As a veteran of Camille, I could not conceive of a worse hurricane. Cindy was correct about the office not taking water in Camille, but she failed to mention that an 80-year-old pine tree fell on the north room of the office and smashed it to kindling. If the tree had fallen on the south room, the Down South magazine would have lost nearly 2 decades of images. Unable to persuade Cindy to release the rest of the photos, I drove down to the base of the rise and waited to turn into the Biloxi Strip traffic. As I waited, I gazed at the Treasure Bay pirate ship casino barge anchored offshore across US 90. As I turned west, I did not know that the next time I saw that pirate ship, it would be on the beach, a whole lot closer to US 90, and that the Mississippi Gulf Coast as I had known it would be no more. 11 days after I took half of the Down South collection to Perkinston to join the civilian half of the Dixie Press collection, the waves of Hurricane Katrina went after the remainder of both of them on the coast, and the wind came after me and the Down South and Dixie Press photos that were in the archives at Perkinston. Fortunately, new windows recently had been placed along a 130-foot arc of the Heidelberg building, which houses the MGCCC archives. The Dunaway Glass Company representative told me that the new windows could withstand 130 miles per hour wind. I wrote out Katrina in the archives rooms. The windows held. The original 45-year-old windows would have been blown out and the archives destroyed. I and the Down South and Dixie Press photos at Perkinston survived unharmed. In Biloxi, Katrina's waves hurled the Treasure Bay Casino pirate ship ashore, gutted the building containing the hook, line, and sinker in Alberti's, battered through the first floor of the Hamill home, crossed the yard, climbed the steps of C.C. Tex Hamill's office, and then receded, leaving the building and the Down South collection intact. In Gulfport, the waves shattered the port and rolled inland up 24th Avenue, destroying structure after structure. As the flood neared the Dixie Press building, the surge expended its power and receded. But I did not know any of this. I naturally assumed that all of the Dixie Press photos in Gulfport and the Down South photos in Biloxi had been destroyed. On the 10th day after Katrina, I made it to Beauvoir. Standing in front of the house, I could see the Treasure Bay pirate ship. I visualized all those beautiful color transparencies and other images blasted all over the hillside above the ship. Because I was one of the few coastal members of the Sons of Confederate Veterans with an undamaged house, I wound up cleaning the scrap iron that was once a premier Civil War artifacts collection. Weekend after weekend for months I cleaned, but I could not summon the courage to call the Hamills or Sherry Dillard. What was the purpose? Hearing them say that all was lost did not appeal to me. Finally, on January 3rd, 2006, I called Cindy Hamill. When she answered, I told her what I had of her father's collection was safe. She replied, "Well, the rest of it's safe too. It's still right where we left it." She and her mother had purchased a new home in Ocean Springs, and because of the difficulties of travel due to destroyed bridges and the consequent traffic jams, we did not meet again at the Hamill compound until February 4th, 2006. At that time, my wife Jane and I removed all the images from the office, and we were given a set of Down South magazines. Emboldened by the Hamill miracle, I called Sherry Dillard on February 6th and offered to return her civilian Dixie Press photos. She said, "No, my shop is wrecked, and I have no place to put them." She continued, "By the way, would you like the military photos back?" I exclaimed, "You mean they survived?" She said, "Yes, we got wind, but we didn't get water, and I took the pictures to my house." I met her at the Dixie Press building on February 27, 2006, at which time she gave the entire Dixie Press collection to MGCCC in perpetuity. While I am not given to ascribing events to divine providence, the fact that all images of the Down South and Dixie Press, located in 3 different places, survived the winds and waters of the Deep South's most destructive hurricane is close enough to a miracle for me. But along with ownership of the images came the responsibility of conserving and preserving them. To do that, the MGCCC archives needed funding for archival supplies and to pay the salaries of technicians. Consequently, when MGCCC President Willis Lott notified me that Dr. Bruce Cole, chairman of the National Endowment for the Humanities, and others were coming for a trip across the devastated coast on March 16, 2006, I volunteered to act as tour guide. My aim, of course, was to secure a grant to save our photo collections. I wanted Cole to see what Katrina took, so I selected a number of photos from the Down South and Dixie Press collections along the route we would run, from Hancock County across to Jackson County. These photos were placed in trip sequence. I had 10 handmade copies to give Cole and his entourage. Cole awarded a $30,000 grant to the MGCCC archives for the purpose of preserving the Down South and Dixie Press collections. I remember thinking that would be far more money than we needed. Technician Melissa Ladner set to work saving the 1,518 color transparencies that were fading. Trudy Brown, a Perkinston campus retiree whose printing looks like typing, set to work transferring Down South photos from the old glassine sleeves to new, clear, archival quality sleeves. Her printing on photos and negative envelopes will be much appreciated by historians of the future, as my hen scratching on the others shall be dreaded. My insistence on captioning the photos necessitated tremendous amounts of research, but I do not see any point in having thousands of photos about which little or nothing is known. Who, what, when, where, and why is the mantra of a historian. I soon discovered that, like the Dixie Press photos, Down South photos demanded a lot of research. The captions for many Down South photos existed, but they were scattered through 177 issues of the magazine. Many of those captions did not contain enough information to suit me. Since I was the only one that could find that information, then I had to do the research for the captions free. Only Melissa and Trudy were paid by the grant. As archivist, I'm paid by MGCCC for 19 hours per week to keep up the archives of the college and supply information to those who need it. The Down South and Dixie Press collections required extra time on my part. If I wanted to work 50 or 60 hours per week, it was strictly up to me. In order to stay out in front of Melissa Ladner and Trudy Brown, that's what I had to do. In 2 years, we ran out of money for Melissa and Trudy. Dr. Bruce Cole gave us another $30,000 grant. 2 years later, we were out of money again. Melissa and Trudy were furloughed. Now alone, I had to raise the money to get them back. I spent months rewriting my hurricane book. It needed a great deal of correction. For one thing, I should never have named it 1717 to the present. The present lasts only 1 millisecond. The 2009 reissue of the book is far more accurate than the original because I corrected a lot of mistakes and added a section on Katrina. I renamed the book 3 Centuries of Destruction. I signed over all rights to the hurricane book to the MGCCC Foundation, and all the money realized from sales went to the Archives Foundation account. This book is printed by the MGCC print shop and thus has a coil binding. Actually, that is an improvement over the original 1986 binding, which dries and cracks. As I prepared to bring the archives workers back for a time with the book money, our MGCCC grant writer, Millie Hyatt, managed to get the archives, through the good offices of Senator Thad Cochran, an Institute of Museum and Library Services, IMLS grant for $100,000. With this windfall, we were able to bring Melissa and Trudy back from their furlough, purchase more equipment, and hire Tracy Reed Glasscox to work specifically on the Dixie Press collection. She had worked on that collection as a student worker in summer 2005. This grant enabled us to complete the effort we had begun more than 7 years before. As we neared the end, MGCCC celebrated its centennial. To commemorate both the centennial and the completion of the Down South and Dixie Press collections, I decided to secure the publication of a book that would recognize both events. I prevailed on the MGCCC Foundation Board to use the money collected from the hurricane book sales to fund a new hardback archival quality book containing 431 photos, 113 of which are in color, showcasing the best images from the Down South magazine and Dixie Press collections. The cover carries the MGCCC Centennial logo and is dedicated to the 12 chief executive officers who have led MGCCC in its first century. The book is titled Gulf Coast Album, A Journey in Historic Photographs 1899 to 2011, from New Orleans across the Mississippi Gulf Coast to Mobile, selections from the Mississippi Gulf Coast Community College archives. I named this work Gulf Coast Album because it does, in small measure, replace the family albums that Hurricane Katrina destroyed in 65,000 homes. The book cover photo was made in March 1939 when Coast Cities commemorated the 240th anniversary of the landing of Iberville. Biloxi staged a pageant titled Biloxi Under 7 Flags. The 7 flag bearers for the pageant posed at the lighthouse. From left, the flags are: the first flag bearer holds the modern Mississippi state flag of 1894. The second one holds the British flag. The third flag bearer is holding a banner that is actually a merger of 2 flags. The bonnie blue flag of West Florida is in the Canton corner, but it should be the same size as the others. The addition of a magnolia tree on the white field of the flag held by the flag bearer in the photo would make it the Mississippi Magnolia State flag of 1861. The correction of this problem by using 2 historic flags is what raised the total of coast flags from 7 to 8. The fourth flag bearer holds the Stars and Stripes. The fifth bearer holds the Confederate Stars and Bars. Sixth is the Spanish Lines and Castles flag, but the fellow holding it is dressed as a Frenchman. Seventh and last is the French fleur-de-lis, but the fellow holding it is dressed as a Spanish conquistador. It would take a history teacher to catch this, but I hope they traded flags before they performed in the pageant that night.